I'd just like to thank you all for attending this climate change event that's being run in conjunction with the University College London, specifically regarding all of the things that you as students and young people can do to help our UK and global societies overcome the many challenges and threats of climate change. Before we delve into the main event, I'm just going to briefly pass you over to our director, Dr. Jasdev Rai, who's going to give you a brief introduction to the SIKH Human Rights Group and our environmental policies.
Hello, thank you very much for coming. This event is also going to be a SIKH channel, so there'll be a much bigger audience than we have tonight. They have something like 2 million people on their Facebook, so you're going to have a much bigger audience than this. My name is Jasdev Singh Rai. I'm the director of SIKH Human Rights Group. We started this in 1985. Our first 7 or 8 years were concentrating on documentation of human rights in Punjab, in India, and many other places. And we found that there are ways of using and leveraging the United Nations, and we were able to influence change in India, in their laws, in their policies, which made human rights a little better there, including more or less forced India to sign the Convention on Torture in 1998. In 93, at the World Conference World Conference on Human Rights, we started diversifying a lot, basing on a pluralist Sikh approach to things. In 96, we started taking the issue of transnational corporations and human rights. Our position was that transnational corporations are more powerful than states, but they're not accountable anywhere. What they do is they bribe or the leaders in many countries. They go around uprooting communities to try and get minerals and oil and things like that. But as far as they're concerned, they didn't do it. It was the government which did it. And so there was a momentum which started to try and get transnationals more accountable. Obviously, transnationals with big pockets tried to stop this or tried to sabotage this. There was a voluntary code eventually. Now there's an intergovernment working group, very serious, which is bringing in binding instruments on transnational corporations and human rights. It's still not what we want. It's still leaving a lot to the states. We then, at 2001, at the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, we took the position that racial diversity is meaningless without cultural diversity, because the message that was coming from most UN institutions and the West was, your color is okay, your culture is not all right. Okay, so become like us and your color will be accepted. So it became a very big thing at the World Conference Against Racism, and you'll see the documents there, nearly 40% of it is about cultural diversity and things like that. We also pushed another agenda called diversity. What our position is that racism is very much a phenomenon of colonialism. It's now 60, 70 years after that. We need to move on to a more positive agenda rather than always be in asking the Western or the white man to treat everybody equally. And my position was that if I was that desperate, I would have taken my turban off. It's a pathology of the Western civilization. They have to come to terms with diversity, and diversity should be taken as a positive approach at the UN, and there should be a declaration on diversity. That started becoming a big thing, and it became a big thing at the Olympics. Initially, the UK was resisting that sort of thing, and then at the Olympics, it became a very big thing. We, of course, were a very small organization. We were nowhere in, we were sort of marginalized. We gave the ideas. In 2008, in 2002, where coming to the current thing, at the World Conference on Sustainable Development at Johannesburg, again, our position was a bit slightly revolutionary, that the biggest influence in people's lives, whether we accept it or not, are religions and belief systems. And if they are not co-opted into the whole climate agenda and the environmental agenda, you can carry on saying what you want. It doesn't really make an impact. And if you can co-opt religions and others, then you will have a much bigger impact. And so they started again in the sustainable development conferences, etc. Co-opting religions has become a big thing. The World Bank also started moving towards that. In 2008, we were invited to the Secretary General of the UN had set up a panel to create universal ethics of environment. One of the things of the Sikh Human Rights Group and the Sikh approach to life is we tend to be shy of hegemony and tend to avoid universalistic approach to things. Okay? Our position in 2008 was that it seems the United Nations seems to know the mind of God now, knowing what universal ethics are. Different civilizations have different approaches to human relations and the environment. And the issues of environment are not new. They've been there for thousands of years. If you look at indigenous people, you look at many other civilizations, they have practices, cultural ideas, concepts, which have all been marginalized in a very hegemonic sort of a debate that is going on in the climate change. We were asked to write a book on this, and we were able to produce it, and a very succinct example was that a great deal of the idea of the nation state and Western civilization is based on ideas of fear, fearing the state, fearing security, fearing this or that. And if you tell the average person in the West that the world is going to end in 30 years, we must take action, they take action. If you tell the average Indian now, who's not been to university, that the world is going to end in 30 years and we must do something, the Indian will look confused at you and say, I believe in reincarnation, my soul will go somewhere else. And the Indian civilization has believed in the plurality, in hundreds of universes long before science came to that today. So he will say, well, my soul will go somewhere else. If it is the karma of the world in 30 years, what is it I can do? All right? So it doesn't, the language of the whole conventions at the UN on climate change, on environment, do not talk to nearly 3/5, if not more, of the world. They talk to one part of the civilization, one part of the world. If the UN really wants to make a change, it needs to co-opt other civilizations and their language, their concepts, and make it more of a civil society movement, not just a state-oriented or a science-based movement. There are incredible theories in Ubuntuism, in Indian civilization, in Confucianism, in many other philosophies and indigenous people, and these have to be brought on board. It was quite interesting. The book became quite controversial within the UN. Eventually it was published, and the panel that was set up decided not to create universal ethics. And then we said you should set universal goals, such as reducing carbon by 2%, etc., and let different civilizations find their own value systems, which I think is where they approached. So they didn't create a universal ethics of environment, but encouraged civilizations, cultures, and beliefs to find their own ethical values to try and promote reduction or more understanding of environment within their cultures, etc. And that is the basis of our conference today. We do a lot more work at the UN in our own little way. We are a small organization, but we try and push agendas, and we try and push things there. The youth is, I think, in a way, the most important, not components, but inheritors of the mess that has been created by generations before. There was a whole generation of human beings who, the bold new human being who could fight and decide and turn everything with science, not realizing that we are limited by our intellect, we are limited by our knowledge, and the universe, nature is far more complex, far more interactive, far more interrelated as well. And eventually this is dawning on people, the mess that has been created. And the future is yours, so unless civil society takes action, takes ownership of this whole thing, we cannot leave it to states, we cannot leave it to decision makers. We cannot leave it to the corporate sector alone. There has to be a cultural change among people that the future, your future, depends on how you push agendas, how you behave, how you bring changes, not in your own life, but that around us. So I hope we will learn a lot from some very experienced and knowledgeable people here today, and hope it will make an impact in your life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rai. There will be more, there will be a brief presentation towards the end of how you can get involved in Sikh human rights groups, summer internship programs and also our volunteer programs. But for now, as you can see, we have a plethora of experts with us today. First and foremost, second to the right, is Dr. Virginie Lee Mason. Dr. Lee Mason is a geographer by training and one of the co-directors of IRDR Centre for Gender and Disaster. Her research looks at gender inequalities and violence-related risks in places affected by environmental changes and disasters. Her ongoing collaborations with grassroots organisations such as SIKH CHANNEL, Oxfam Intermon, and more recently Plan International support applied research and inform gender-responsive humanitarian and development programmes. She currently acts as a global monitoring and evaluation coordinator for GRRIPP, or GRIP, a £4.8 million project funded by UKRI to federal organisations and scholars working on gender inequality or looking for gender equality in the development and humanitarian sectors. Virginie is also a research associate at the Overseas Development Institute, a development think tank based in London, where she has worked for almost 5 years on resilience-related studies in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. In 2017, she co-edited a book published by Routledge with Professor Susan Buckingham on the importance to address climate change with attention to gender relations and power relationships. Sitting directly in front of me is Miss Lisa Hill, a retired school business manager who lives in Newbury and who has 3 grown-up children. Lisa has a physics degree from London University and then subsequently qualified as an accountant. She has also been an active member of Extinction Rebellion for 2.5 years. During that time, she has taken part in demonstrations, as well as helped to organise and appear at their talks and training initiatives. To my right is Mr. SIKH Polanski. Mr. Polanski is a Green Party politician, a London Assembly member, and he also chairs London's Environmental Committee. SIKH is also the Green Party's national spokesperson for democracy and citizen engagement. Last, but by no means least, at the very far end of the table, is Miss Serena Bashal. Serena has recently graduated from a mathematics and biology undergraduate degree and now works for a leading energy company, SSE. She has been engaging with the United Nations climate change programs as a young leader for 6 years at every UN climate change COP since COP22, working on youth advocacy, climate justice and the energy transition, amongst various other matters. She was elected as the 2019 Global Focal Point to the UN Climate Change Youth Constituency, where she facilitated engagement for thousands of youth within UN space. She was the Programme Coordinator for the 16th UN Climate Change Conference of Youth, the official COP26 Youth Conference, as well as the Youth Delegate to the Pre-Milan Youth Conference. She also volunteers with the UK Youth Climate Coalition in their COP working group and works on several other climate projects in her spare time. She works in international, national and local spheres and with a variety of actors from governments to NGOs to private sector actors. So, let's begin. What is climate change? Whilst I'm sure that many of you already know this, climate change refers to the change in temperature and weather patterns across the globe due to our species' overconsumption of our planet's resources, namely fossil fuels. However, to give you a specific definition, global climate change refers to the average long-term changes over the entire Earth. These include warming temperatures and changes in precipitation, as well as the effects of the Earth's warming, such as rising sea levels, shrinking mountain glaciers, ice melting at a faster rate than usual in Greenland, Antarctica and the Arctic, change in flower and plant blooming times that can have devastating effects on our access to food and our overall food security. So for thousands of years, the Earth has been changing, was constantly been changing, even before the emergence of humankind. However, scientists have recently observed unusual changes. For example, the Earth's average temperature has been increasing much more quickly than scientists would expect over the past 150 years. For instance, and as you can see from the graph that's currently displayed on the screen, there have been scientifically significant changes in the planet's average temperature that cannot just simply be blamed on coincidence. One of the major impacts of global warming is the melting of ice caps and the subsequent rise in sea levels. And this is something that threatens coastal and low-lying areas in the UK. In other words, without sufficient action, experts warn that coastal and low-lying areas in the UK that are vulnerable to flooding, such as London, could be submerged by 2050. So in 2020, the rise in global sea levels reached a record high of 3.6 inches above 1993 levels, according to a study undertaken by the United Kingdom's government. The rate at which the sea levels are rising has also more than doubled throughout most of the 20th century, from 0.06 inches per year to 0.14 inches per year. The top 10 areas at risk to be submerged underwater by 2050 are Portsmouth, East Riding of Yorkshire, Arran in West Sussex, Merton in London, Chichester in West Sussex, Kensington and Chelsea, also in London, Conwy in Wales, Great Yarmouth in Norfolk, West Berkshire and Worthing. However, these are not anomalies. As you can see from this graph, which depicts the spatial variation in maximum air temperature in the UK each month for the periods from 1980 to 2000, 2020 to 2040, and 2040 to 2060. This visualization shows that all parts of the UK are going to get hotter over time, especially in the summer months. And the southeast of the UK will experience the hottest days. Moving on, this slide or chart represents the spatial variation in rainy days per month in the UK for the same time period as the previous graph. The author of these graphs, Tega Attica Udi from Frontier Economics, defined a rainy day as a day with over 1 millimetre of precipitation. The trend in precipitation varies regionally across the UK. Over time, the northwest of the UK or northern Scotland will experience more rainy days, most predominantly in the winter months, whereas the southeast and parts of Wales would experience fewer ones. Therefore, and as you can see, we are on a path to rising temperatures and increased rainfall, even if we cut down our emissions. But the situation will evidently be much worse if we don't have a substantial societal change now. And as you can see from this graph, whilst energy suppliers, the transport sector and corporations are the largest contributors to climate change, we as individuals can play our part in reducing climate anxiety through small incremental changes. Our panellists today are going to explore these changes and how you as students and young people can make a real and significant difference for a better future. So today's event really is an opportunity for you to learn more about how you can help our UK and global societies overcome the many challenges and threats currently posed by climate change. We'll start by asking the panellists some broad questions in order to get their take on the matter. However, please note that there will be a short audience Q&A towards the end of the session where we hope we'll have some audience interaction. And that will be handled by my colleague, Ms. Bethan Walters, who's sitting to my left. She's our Human Rights, Media and Communications Officer. So really, the next thing to say is welcome panellists, and thank you very much for joining us. Panellists, I'm going to join you at the table and we'll get started. So, panellists, my first question for you today is, in your expert opinions, how important are young people in our national effort to mitigate and adapt to the negative impacts of climate change, and what can secondary school and university students specifically do to help us as a society overcome the many challenges and imminent threats of climate change? And Dr. Lee Mason, if I could ask you to go first.
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to answer your question with making two comments first. The first one is that young people actually constitute a group of very diverse people. It's not only children, it's also adolescents and young adults. And these people come with a variety of socio-economic characteristics. Those below 18 years old, they don't even have the right to vote yet. Those who come from families with low economic backgrounds may not have the same options when it comes to change the way they consume. And then, in general, your age, your gender, your cultural background will influence heavily your opportunity to make decisions at your family level or within your community. So this first comment is really to be mindful of these differences because those mitigation or adaptation action will be implemented by people of very different social characteristic. The second comment I wanted to make is that there is a gap between the global issue of climate change and ecological disaster at a planetary scale and the individual scale. And we are asked as individuals to make actions in the way we live, and often those actions create huge dilemmas in our daily lives. And so there is this gap because we have the planetary problem of climate change, and there is the individual level, but there is the middle, the collective action, and it's the collective action, the economic system, the political system that led to the global issue. So we shouldn't be distracted as individuals with our collective power to change the global issue. And we've been reminded earlier this week by the latest volume of the IPCC report that came out on Monday. I don't know if you've seen it, but it reminded us that the single most important action to mitigate climate change is to stop extracting fossil fuels, and we need to cut down our consumption of oil by 70% by 2050, and we need to abandon coal burning altogether. So this sort of scale of action is not going to be facilitated by what we do as individuals. It's going to be possible by our collective power. So it's really important to keep this reality in mind and not to feel too disillusioned or disempowered by the scale of it, but also the injunction from marketing, from the media, by politicians about what we are responsible to do as individuals. And so to answer your initial question, and given the diversity of young people and given the scale of the problem, I'd like to suggest 3 different pieces of advice, especially to young people. And the first one is to really focus on your education. You need to know the science, you need to know the economics, the geopolitical processes that led to climate change, so that you are equipped to make informed decisions about the way you're going to vote, for example, and the decision you're going to make at your household levels. The second advice is to really master the ability to trace information back to reliable sources. That goes with science, but it goes also with any sort of information you get from the media, so that when you hear political speech, you can make your own informed judgments and exercise critical judgments. And the last thing, and I will conclude with this, is to consider and invest your time to really consider how you want your concern for the environment to shape your career. You don't have to become a climatologist to prove that you care about climate change. And as I said, the single most important action is to mitigate climate change is to cut down fossil fuel consumption. And so it's really a matter of thinking, how will the job you're making, the time you're going to invest in your positions, will make a difference in different sectors, because it really is an all-society effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really excellent. Ms. Michelle, could I put the same question to you?
Yes, so this is kind of something that I shout about all the time, because my kind of focus is youth activism within the UN space. So on the first question about the importance of young people, I think that firstly, it's we have to have this focus, because we will be inheriting everything, and we are the next generation of leaders, next generation of CEOs, of government leaders, of decision makers, policy makers, everything. And so we don't want to be inheriting a planet that's crumbling to pieces, and there's nothing really left for us, and it's unsustainable, and there's also nothing left for our next generations, and when we want to have children and grow our families and things like this. And so for us to kind of take the lead on here, learn how to take action, but also learn how to, when I say take action, not just kind of in an activisty way, but stepping into these leadership roles that we are going to be kind of forced to do as we inherit the planet in the next generations to come. The other thing that I would like to raise is that young people naturally are just so innovative and so creative by nature, just naturally being fresh to this planet. So being able to bring so many new ideas that maybe the previous generations hadn't thought of already, or maybe that's not being implemented already, we can bring this because, we're new, like the ideas that we bring. Another thing is that why it's so important for us as young people is that maybe we don't have as much responsibility in terms of what we can and can't say. Maybe we don't already have this long career that we've been doing for 10, 20 years, where now we're kind of restricted in the messages that we can say because we have people watching us, boss, employer, whoever. Whereas when you're a bit younger, maybe you have a right to have a bit more angst and you can actually apply it because, you know, you're free, you have a bit more freedom in that sense. And actually one more thing about why I think the young people are so important in this movement is because as the world and all of the industries and all of the ideas and everything moving forward, it's kind of going through a bit of a revolution at the moment. It's quite novel. Everything is changing and maybe starting from new ideas. So the ideas are young, right? And we're young as well. And we're kind of like these babies and we're going to grow together. And so it enables us to kind of move in parallel and move in tandem along with these new ideas, us as young people, all growing together. And I think that's really nice. And yeah, this idea of parallel growth. And actually, I think there was another part to this question about what young people can actually do. And I think everything and anything. So I think there's also kind of two routes and paths. You can take the more activism, shouting, loud and proud kind of route, or you can take a more career, job route and do it that way as well. So when I was doing it, I was looking on the internet for NGOs because I wanted to go into the activism side. I was already kind of in it because I was doing activism before when I was younger, but anyways, and doing it that way. And then also there's just so many different topics, you know, it's so all-encompassing, whether it's wanting to look at science and agriculture or politics and law or energy and all of these kind of different things, or gender as well. There's literally every single topic has some kind of way in, arts, culture, music, literature. And I do think if you have a personal interest, you can kind of tap into it in any way you like and bring it all together. And I really love that about this movement because basically anyone can find a way that it relates to their passions and make it interesting for them. Because you can't make a change if you're bored about it, you know? It has to actually hit you inside and you have to find it interesting. And I think I'm going to leave it there.
That was really excellent. Very wise words. Zach, could I put the same question to you?
Absolutely. So first of all, these are two fantastic answers and I'd endorse every word. It seems tremendously unfair to answer a question about young people after such an articulate young person has just given a brilliant answer like that, and I also very much agree with your answers. Just on a wider point, I'd say thank you very much for inviting me to the event, and also thank you for your opening words there. This is the first thing, and it jumps off the back of that answer, that we've got to find it interesting. And actually, I think somewhere the environmental movement maybe has gone wrong in the past, and I totally understand it, is we focused on the doom and the gloom, and that is absolutely there, I'm not denying it for a second. But I think it really helps when we focus on the urgency of the matter, that something needs to happen now. So this isn't about what's happened in history or where we've come from, but actually what are the decisive actions that we can all take individually, and I will argue more importantly at government, institutional and business level too, to make those changes. So just to rewind a little bit to give you my perspective, as was mentioned, I'm a London Assembly member and I chair the Environment Committee. I know lots of people often don't know what the London Assembly is. There are 25 of us that you've elected in London to hold the Mayor Sadiq Khan to account. And as a Green Party member, although I'm in a different party to Mayor Sadiq Khan, I pledged at the very beginning of being elected that I was going to work constructively with him. So I would say I'm very much a critical friend to Sadiq, and we talk about lots of the decisions that are made about the environment in London. And, you know, I'm not going to be disingenuous, we've had the odd public argument too when I do disagree with him. But generally, as a rule and a principle, I always want to work collaboratively because this whole situation is much more important than party politics, and ultimately we're going to have to come together to create these solutions. And then I guess my final kind of direct answer to this is when I look at a day that I've had today. So this morning I started the morning on the BBC having a debate about transport with other politicians, and in that debate I was really disheartened by the lack of urgency from some of the other parties. Now, I'm not come here to give a party political broadcast, although we are in the middle of elections. Because I was pleased to hear that the other politicians are starting to get it now. They're at least talking about the environment, they're at least talking about the climate emergency, but what is missing is that sense of urgency. And in this debate that was specifically on transport in London, I was talking a lot about the changes that were needed to be made, and the answers I was getting back from some of the other parties were, well, yes, we agree, but it's complicated and it's long and we've got to bring people with us. And all those things are true. It is complicated. We do have to bring people with us, but we've got to get faster. and we've got to show leadership on that. And I think one of the key ways we can do that is exactly this answer, through arts, through music, through the different things that aren't necessarily mainstream politics and not necessarily environmentalism, but are where communities are at. We can't talk at people. I realise I'm doing a little bit of that now, but hopefully we're going to have an engagement soon. But actually you've got to go to where communities are and actually genuinely engage with people. And then straight after the debate, I went off. I've just come from Surbiton, where there's a place called Seething Wells. Now, Seething Wells is a random example to give you, but I just happen to have come from there now, is an area of conservation interest, so it has a protection over it. But the council have slowly allowed it to degrade. In fact, there's evidence that they have been killing some of the biodiversity and animals on purpose, allowing the space to die and to go barren so property developers can come in and put housing there. That is a totally unacceptable situation, and it needs to be called out. So I met members of the community there, and I could feel some of the despondency from the community that I often feel when I talk about the climate, when people face how bad and how dangerous things are. And the thing I said to them, which I'm going to end up here, is that ultimately, I'm more talking about conservative politicians, but it could be anyone on the right wing. One of their key tactics is to make us despondent, to make us think the challenge is too big, or to make us think that we can't take action because we're just one person and we're too small. And that's how they win. But the way we win at this is by knowing that is not true. That with hope, with inspiration, and with taking action and coming together, we can make the world better. And not only will we tackle the climate emergency, we'll do 1,000,001 good things that are just good to do in of themselves. Things like gender inequality. We can start to make that more equal. We can make sure that everyone's got a good job, that everyone's breathing clean air, that they've got a good home and a good job, and they're based in the community, and lots of other things. So I think that's always important to say, that tackling the climate emergency gives a whole host of other benefits, as well as, of course, bringing down emissions, because we've got to keep 1.5 above.
Thank you very much, that was really thorough, thank you. Lisa, can I pass over to you?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to follow all of those, really, because those were just fantastic answers. So I'm from a group called Extinction Rebellion, which you may have heard about. And Extinction Rebellion is lots of ordinary people like me looking for a solution to the climate and ecological crises. Because it's not really climate change, it's a flipping crisis. Yeah? And I'm very conscious that this gentleman and I are very much older than the rest of you. So it's not past generations who have messed this up, it's really our generation, my generation. And coming here today, the first thing I want to do is just apologise really for having messed it up so badly, and I mean that from my heart. It was only a couple of years ago that the penny really dropped for me, that things were really as bad as they are. Until then, I thought someone's going to come along, sort it out, it's a scientific problem, the scientists know the answers, why wouldn't they fix it in the world? Why wouldn't they fix it? But they're not, and that's why I stopped work. I had the luxury, I was able to stop work and join Extinction Rebellion to try and demand that our governments and organisations, because in the end it is only the governments and the organisations who can really make a difference, do something about it. So Extinction Rebellion is a non-violent group. You've probably seen us sitting in the road. You may even have sat in the road yourself, some of you, I don't know. You'll have seen other people from Just Up Oil and Extinction Rebellion this week blocking oil refineries. Why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? Really because nothing else seems to be working. Over the past 40, 50 years, scientists, the IPCC reports, which have got more and more serious as we've gone on, they have all come out. Everyone has known, or the people that matter have known what's happening, yeah? Other organisations have been formed, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, we all know what they look like, charging across the oceans, doing fantastic work, political parties, the Greens, and yet still we're at this situation where the IPCC report issued a couple of days ago says we've got not the lifetime of your generation, but actually 3 or 5 years to really make a difference. 3 or 5 years to make a difference. This is absolutely serious stuff. And we're desperate. And that's why we block oil refineries. And I'm not desperate for myself. I've had a lovely life, thank you. I'm desperate for you and for my children and for the children that maybe my children will have. At the moment they won't, but they might. So that was just an introduction to me, why I'm here, what Extinction Rebellion is. To answer the question, how important are young people to mitigate and adapt, and what can they do to help us as a society? The answer is, yeah, of course, you're critical. And the primary way that you are critical is to give it your urgent attention now. Talk to each other about it, talk to your families about it, talk to your employers about it. Give it your attention and speak up. I mean, I'm petrified. I'm absolutely petrified about where we are. And I can't imagine what it must be like to be a young person in this situation. Well, I can. And it's very sobering. The IPCC report issued a few days ago, which other people have already mentioned, say that greenhouse gases have got to peak by 2025 and they've got to be practically halved by 2030. That's really not very far away, and it's only by massive changes that we must make this dash to a low carbon economy. What was the quote? I've lost my quote now. That the IPC issued it, the headline they issued with it this week was that it's now or never. It's now or never. So we're in a really, really serious situation. So what can you do? Give it your attention. Be hopeful. I so completely agree with you, Jack, about what you said. Yeah. Despite the fact that the first 5 minutes of what I've just said did not sound hopeful. Actually, I am hopeful, because otherwise you just go away and sit in a dark room, really, you know, and watch TV on repeat. You've got to be out there, and that's why I'm here, because I am hopeful. I know that we can do it. I know the world can do it, because we've got all these brilliant people, yeah, who want it to happen. In terms of what you can do to help, I think that the main areas, and I think Virginie touched on some of these already. The main area, although it's the size of the task is too great now for getting your recycling done and taking the bus rather than the car, is not going to cut it. Yeah, it is only the people who decide how our energy is generated, decide on the transport infrastructure that is built, decide on agricultural rules and regulations about quite how much of the Amazon we can plough up to make McDonald's, things like that. Those are the people making the decisions. As consumers, we can drive some of those decisions. You can. So we all know what to do, don't we? It's plant-based food, because meat takes a huge amount more of the Earth's resources and the ground to make a hamburger than it does to make a plant-based burger. Yes, choose your travel, fly less. Don't buy so much stuff. Just don't buy so much stuff. Clothes, fast fashion. There are lots of ways that it still is important to model and talk about these changes with your peers and your families. Join a group. Join the Greens. Join Extinction Rebellion. Yes, study. Yeah, there are lots of groups out there. There will be one for you, and if there isn't, start one. Yeah, there's one that doesn't work for you, well, start one that does. I'm going to stop now. But yeah, you're very important. You're crucial. I'm sorry it's come to this, but there is much to be hopeful about. But we need to be shouting very loud and hard about it very soon.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That was truly excellent. And thank you very much, panelists, all of you, for some really excellent answers. My next question to you is for those wishing to undertake their own environmental conservation projects in London and the surrounding areas. What projects would you say the surrounding areas are most need of, and what advice would you give them? And Zach, could I ask you to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the important question. So I want to link this to the first question, because we talked before about the difference between kind of doing environmentalism as a career and environmentalism as activism. And I'm going to challenge it a little bit, although I do hear the distinction too.
That you can do them at the same time.
Exactly. So in 2018, I was arrested with Extinction Rebellion for blocking a road. Now, activism would not always, it wouldn't necessarily be my first place to go, and that's because, as you've heard, I'm a democracy spokesperson, and I will always be out there making the argument for democracy and voting and why we need elected representatives to be making appropriate decisions for us. There's two problems with that argument, though. One is they're not. So we're electing people and they're not making appropriate decisions, so what recourse do we have? And two, this is slightly niche, but I think it is important in any environmental conversation, that this country has a first-past-the-post voting system, which means that the majority of votes that people vote for do not reflect or do not represent what people actually want. So we end up in this very binary fight between Labour and Conservatives, and often people vote for the least worst option, which isn't necessarily voting for the planet and making actionable things happen. So then the question to me when I wanted to vote for the Greens, this was before I'd been elected, was yes, I'll keep voting, yes, I'll keep campaigning, but actually with 3 to 5 years, do we really have time to change the voting system, get more Greens elected, get a Green government, and then rewind things back? We don't have time to do that. So I'm still obviously advocating that route because I'm a Green politician, and I can completely see the need for activism too. So I think those two things can coexist and should coexist together. So then I think there's a further point here, which I think we might be coming to later on, but I'm going to jump in there a little bit, is that very often I go on LBC or Sky News or some of the more right-wing media shows, and they can't quite get their head around the fact that I'm a politician and an activist, and they never quite know how to interview it. So their most obvious question to me always is, are you vegan, do you fly? And the answer is, well, yes, I'm vegan and I haven't flown in years. And those answers are completely missing the point, which I always say to them, because actually you don't have to be vegan and you can fly. We really need those bigger changes, the big organisational government changes. Now that's not to say I don't encourage veganism, it's not to say I certainly don't encourage flying. However, it is a government tactic and a right-wing media tactic to turn us on each other and start blaming, the blame game. And we know from the climate emergency that the people most affected are often from working class communities and often people of colour when we look around the world at the global majority. So there is a privilege to being able to tackle the climate emergency in this country. There's a privilege to being able to be arrested with Extinction Rebellion. Now that is not criticising anyone who's arrested, obviously. In fact, I would say if you have that privilege, it is almost your duty, if you feel able to put yourself in that situation because you have that privilege. And it's important that we still recognise that there's a privilege there to be had. To answer the question directly, because I've gone all over the place like a typical politician, about what you can do to get involved with conservation projects. So the thing I was going to say was I very much appreciated the call to join the Green Party. I'd also echo a call that joining your local Extinction Rebellion group, or there's lots of other groups too, Insulate Britain, Just Stop Oil, there's lots of different groups based on topic. There's a lot of positive answers I could give you to this about why you should join a local conservation group, but I'm going to flip it the other way around and want to talk about some of the horrendous things going on in London that I'd really encourage you, particularly young people, if they're in your area, to get involved with, because actually they need more voices. The most obvious one is a bit niche, but it shouldn't be niche, which is why I'm going to talk about it now. It's the Silvertown Road Tunnel. Now this is a project between Greenwich and Newham to build a new motorway under the ground that's going to cost £2.5 billion. Now when I said I sometimes disagree with Mayor Sadiq Khan, this is probably the area that as soon as I mention it, I see him kind of tense up because he knows I'm coming for him on it. And I will, because it is an absolutely awful project that's being built during a climate emergency. There's what's called embedded carbon, so that's the carbon in the actual thing that you're building, plus all the carbon of encouraging traffic to go through that tunnel. And Newham has a working class population, a majority population of people of colour, some of the worst toxic air in London, and it doesn't make sense to be funneling more cars and more traffic through that area. In fact, there are some areas in London where if you grow up as a baby, you are likely to grow up with stunted lungs compared to if you live somewhere like Kensington and Chelsea, where the traffic is less because it's managed in different ways. That's completely unacceptable. So that's one place, Silvertown Tunnel. The other place is Sealing Wells. I just spoke about it. Anyone who might live or be near Surbiton, they certainly need help campaigning there. And then there's a huge issue in London around trees as well and the protection of trees. Very often you get these greedy private developers that want to build homes, and I'm not anti-building homes, by the way. It's too easy to say, we don't need homes, we just need green space, because of course I want the green space, but I do accept we have a homeless issue in London, and you know, we've got to be pragmatic. But there is enough brownfield sites. Those are things like land that Transport for London used to own that we could build on when nothing is being done. There's absolutely no need to be chopping down trees. And in fact, in France, there's some brilliant examples of architects that work around the trees or take old council or social housing, and rather than knocking it down, which again is terrible for embedded carbon, they actually build onto the site to make it more beautiful or to add adjuncts to it. So I think we can be more creative with how we can serve things. So the much shorter answer to the long answer I've given is just get involved, like see what is going on in your local area. I think the hyper-local is really, really helpful. Very often, you know, I say this as someone who went to COP26 or involved with United Nations, those things are really, really important. And actually just as important as your small local area, because there will be a community there who are trying to rescue something, trying to protect something, or just trying to get a local green park and a green space for young people, or anyone in fact. And all of those things are valid and they're all necessary. So if you want to get involved, I wouldn't wait ages to decide what the right project is, just go get involved.
Thank you very much, Zach. It's really excellent. Virginie, could I put the same question to you?
Well, after this answer, I can't really add much, especially that I haven't lived in London for 5 years now. I used to live in Brixton, and back in 2015, Brixton Road was the most polluted street in London, and as a cyclist, I could really feel it. And in fact, I started to wear a mask, and I was the only one wearing a mask, and everyone looking down at me, but now we're all wearing masks, so that's the irony, to show that norms change and it's okay. But now I live in Exeter in Devon, and I realize how a local conservation project can be just as important, because I work more at the international level, I work a lot with the UN, and it really feels empowering sometimes when we see that nothing changed. But at the local level, this is where I could see the Greens really making an impact, because as the Green get more votes, then now Labour's, who is in charge of Exeter, are really putting ecology in the environment in their programme. In fact, they are even more environmentally friendly than the Greens are. So just to say that it really matters to get involved into local conservation projects. Well, that's all I'm going to say.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Lisa, could I pass over to you?
Yeah, and I think just sort of building on what the other panellists have said, and going back to the idea of hope, yeah, because it's very easy to become unhopeful about the state the world is in. But the way I find hope is by working with other people locally on local conservation projects, and I think you find this very often, that people try and do things at a sort of political level, or a higher level or whatever, but then actually it's only by working in their own community that they really draw strength from that. And what can I say about working in your community? It's a revelation, yeah. Getting involved with other people, not just people your own age, but in different ages and from different backgrounds. It's really good fun, and actually it takes all sorts to make those things happen. Yeah. So I'm an accountant by training. Physics was my degree, but then like most physics graduates, if there's any here, you go off and become an accountant. So I'm really good at filling in forms. So the job I've done, and I realised that, so when I stopped work, I realised that I had a skill of applying for funding. Yeah, I'm really good at applying for funding. So I just trawled all the local community groups and asked what they needed and matched them up with funding, because there's loads of organisations that give away money. So last year we got 3 different lottery grants for 3 different projects. One for trees, who mentioned trees, that was you, Zach, because maintaining the existing trees that we have in cities and bringing new greenery into cities is going to be really important to mitigate the increasing temperatures. Yeah, it's much better to have a tree-lined avenue. That'll be much cooler than if you don't have any trees there. So it's simples really. Plant trees. So we had one grant for that. We had another grant to restore some water meadows, and that work is just starting. And then another grant to put on an exhibition. This isn't so much conservation, but in its broadest sense, I suppose, conserving the planet, to put on a big exhibition for householders to come to and get some hands-on experience and information about green energy, so air source heat pumps, solar panels, all of that kind of stuff that really needs to happen. Because actually for your average householder, pitching up and thinking, well, I need to do all these things, how do I do them? You know, it's not the easiest thing to do actually. You need to be quite determined, apart from having some money, to do it. So it takes all sorts to make these things happen. And just because you might not be an expert on one thing doesn't mean that your skills aren't needed. So they need people who are organised, people who are happy to go and literally get their hands dirty maybe, but also form fillers and people who want to keep the bank accounts tight. So there are lots of different ways to get involved, and they will welcome you with open arms for the particular skill that you have. So I'm not from London, but I'm sure there are lots of projects here, and back home, wherever home is for you, as students. You know, large and small there will be projects, so get involved is my advice.
That's really excellent. Play on your strengths, as it were. Mr. Michelle, could I pass over to you, please?
Yeah, sure. So for those wanting to... That was a bit very far. For those wanting to undertake projects in London, I think because, say you want to go on the internet, on Google or wherever you might find things to do, you kind of search and there's just so much, and then you kind of look at it and you think, okay, this is flooding me. I don't even know where to start right now. And you'll see there's so many different topics, like what I was saying in my first response about how this whole issue taps into basically everything you can think of. I think that's why when you go on wherever internet platform to find something to do, some kind of project, no one project or one topic or one field is more important than the other. Like you'll have some that are maybe related to higher emissions. So for example, if it's related to energy or if it's related to agriculture, this might be a more higher emission field, and you might think, okay, I want to jump into this because this is how I'm going to make the most impact and hit something really, really important. But the thing is, I think even things that are maybe a bit lower emission, when I was talking about arts and culture, all of these different things will hit a different demographic, a different topic, and build that movement that we need and that driving force and that strength, which is what is pushing us forward and actually making that change. And I think, so when I was talking about different project topics, so for my career, I just graduated from uni last summer, so I'm now 6-7 months into my grad scheme. I chose to work in energy, and I chose this because I felt like I wanted to get right to the core of climate mitigation. I wanted to work with what's causing these emissions, and I wanted to get to the root of the problem, which is energy source, or one of the roots is the energy sources. And actually this brings me back to this debate about activism / career. Are they both? Are they separate? So for me, now that I'm kind of working in the corporate world, even though it's still very environmentally focused and there's renewables and the energy transition, I have to watch what I say now. And even right now, someone from work might see this stream and then see me being all activisty, and they don't like that so much because now I have to represent the brand a bit more. And that's why I do think, well, for me personally anyway, it does kind of impact me in the sense that they're a bit separate, but luckily they're very nice and they let me do things like take time off to go to COP and UN meetings. Anyways, so bringing it back to this kind of activism versus career, I feel like when you're looking at going to undertake a project in London, whether that is activism or career, full-time day job, your kind of full-time occupation, if you choose to go down that route, allows you to actually do something, as in implement it and physically go to that, whatever it is, and actually make that change. Whereas I feel like taking the more activism route is more about movement building, and it's more about building the community and bringing together the people and building and fleshing out that driving force that I was just talking about a moment ago. And I kind of think there is a bit of a difference between the two, unless you are lucky enough to be like Zach, where you can combine the two. Just something to think about. Anyway, so like I said, I actually am from London, and so just some ideas of the projects that I have gotten involved with in the city. So most of my work for the past 6 years or so has been international level and national, working with the governments. But over the last maybe 2-ish years or so, I've tried to integrate my local work a lot more, because that balance of local, national, international, all working together is really, really, it's key to actually have that change happen. So things that I like to do are organising local summits or participating or speaking at them, and I really like that, especially the youth ones. So a few years ago with Amnesty International UK, we organised a youth human rights and climate change summit in London, somewhere near the river. And that was so nice because it tapped into, it was also focused at the slightly younger audience, maybe late teens, mid-teens. That was really nice because it was young people outside of my own personal bubble, and we were able to interact and have these plenary sessions and also some interactive workshops and building that movement that I keep on banging on about. Now the thing that I've done is, actually this time last year, I got canvassed with some local councillors or local councillors to be knocking at my door asking us to vote for them in the local election. And so I took the guy's WhatsApp number and I was like, when you get elected, because I know you will, I'm going to talk to you about some climate stuff, we're going to do some stuff together.